I'm Sherry Elam with the Bee Supply Monthly Magazine, and I am super honored today to have what I'll say an acquaintance. I have my second interview, but I've actually met this man in person, Dr. Jamie Ellis, and I'll briefly say he's got so many accolades. I'm going to narrow it down to just a few and say, per a reading from something from another publication, you helped create the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, Bee College, and Master Beekeeper program. You supervise PhD and master students and has contributed to and developed the development of 5 courses on beekeeping at University of Florida. Whew. Over 30 active research projects, probably more than that now, because this was from 2021, and I could just go on and on and on. Received many accolades, and I know that's true. And I will almost put a pin in it and say most of my presentations and articles have something of you in every one of them. Welcome, Jamie Ellis.
Thanks, Sherry. I really appreciate you having me on this interview. It's my pleasure to be able to join you, and I hope that what we discuss can help beekeepers.
Oh, I'm quite certain it will. You've got a few years behind you in this, looking at our little bug that we love so much.
Mm-hmm.
I would love for us to delve off into some aspects that are just basic beekeeping, really, because that's where I think that you shine. I have watched many of your presentations, and in person and online, and you're very good at explaining things in a very reasonable, understandable manner, and that's why you're so popular. I'll just say that out loud. So let's start by talking about feeding. You know, any time of year feeding can be necessary, but as we enter into I'll say times of year that are more important than others, which would be winter pending. Let's talk about that. What's your take on feeding, and what can you share with us?
So I'll start by saying that I am definitely a pro feed person when it's necessary. I know that there's a lot of folks who don't want to feed bees, and if let Mother Nature do it. If Mother Nature can't do it, then bees are in the wrong spot. But I'm not one of those folks. We manage bees in ways that are different from how bees would otherwise take care of themselves, right? And we have high densities of colonies in apiaries. We might have low forage at certain times of the year. And so I would just start off by answering that question by saying, in managed beekeeping, feeding is often very necessary, and you shouldn't be concerned about doing it. It's not a problem to do it. You should do it if your bees need it. So that's really the point of this discussion, is determining when bees need it and how best to do it. And so we'll start with the first one, identifying when bees need it. So maybe the listeners and the viewers of this particular episode don't know, but we're actually recording this in late September of a year. And in late September, in many areas around temperate North America, bee colonies are transitioning from big, strong populations in spring and summer to where the queen is slowing her egg output, and we're heading directly into fall. In fact, it's calendar fall already as we talk. And for many places in North America, in temperate world, it's already starting to get cool, maybe even cold. So bee colonies must have food reserves in their hives in order to survive the second half of fall and, of course, all of winter. And they either have to get that on their own, or we have to provide it for them, depending on the amount that they already have in their hive. And my general rule of thumb, Sherry, is that I like to see a colony have at least a medium super's worth of stored food, energy, honey, sugar syrup, whatever, to get them through winter. Now, if you keep bees in double deeps, that means your uppermost deep should be 2/3 at least full of food. If you keep bees in exclusively mediums, for example, you would have that upper medium full of food. Where I grew up in Georgia, and where we keep bees here in Florida, the University of Florida, we always try to have about a medium super's worth of food on colonies heading through winter. And so at this time of year, as we're doing this interview on into October, we'll go and inspect colonies and make sure they in fact have that much food. And if they don't, we feed them to make sure that they can fill those supers and have what they need to survive winter.
Mhm. And are you feeding 2 to 1 or 1 to 1 this
Yeah,
time?
that's a really interesting question. So I'll
It
answer it
is.
shortly, and then I'm going to give a long answer. The short
Okay.
answer is we do feed more concentrated sugar this time of year. So 2 to 1 would be your answer to your question. That's the short answer. And so I want to elaborate on this because I know the viewers of this video are wondering why this is even a discussion at all. Well, in beekeeping, there is this generally held belief that in spring and early summer, coming out of winter and then spring and then early summer, if bees need food, you would feed 1 to 1. So 1 part sugar by volume to 1 part water by volume. And the idea is that that's a lighter sugar. And the whole premise behind this is that lighter sugar it more closely mimics the sugar to water ratio in nectar, which convinces the bees it's a nectar flow. So they need to invest in growth and all of that stuff. Well, this time of year, it's fall and we're heading into winter. And bees aren't really, we don't want their colonies to grow. We want them to put on the weight, that energy weight, to be able to survive the coming winter. And so we up that concentration of sugar to get it closer to honey to coerce them to store it rather than use it to build. So the old adage is, 1 to 1 in late winter, early spring, 2 to 1 in fall, and when you're trying to put on weight. And so the reason I'm going through this big long discussion is I've actually never seen any research on that idea. I know that it is industry held and that people do it all the time. And there's, if you want to stimulate bees, it's 1 to 1. If you want to put on the weight, it's 2 to 1. So we just do what everybody else does, but I think it's waiting to have a research project to actually answer that question. So the short answer to your question is we also feed 2 to 1-ish,
2 to 1.
this time of year.
Right. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. I did find in the catacombs of research, Randy Oliver did I'll call it a field study on consumption, time frame, what the bees did with it, and was there really a difference in the time of building wax? Truly is what we're thinking of when we're building colonies first of spring, as far as storing the sugar syrup. And it was literally, if memory serves me, just hours difference in the amount of wax that was built with 1 to 1 as it was with 2 to 1. Storage really didn't come into play much, but it's really the same. It just is a seasonal tricking that we try to do for our bees to kind of say, end of February, we're going to start 1 to 1, but yeah, 2 to 1. And that, on the same hand, really, the thicker store-bought syrup, pre-made syrup, is super thick.
It is,
and
yeah.
I like that because they consume it less at a slower rate, and I think do more with it. So in that instance, you could almost do thick all year.
Yeah. It's one of those things I'd love to study. In fact, while we're talking, I'm thinking about putting it on my list of projects to pursue. But
please do.
Yeah, but I will say, until I have reason to do otherwise, we tend to do 1 to 1-ish, kind of in that stimulating period, late winter, early spring, and 2 to 1 this time of year. The key this time of year is you're not really wanting colonies to grow. You really want weight. Bees, I mean, everybody listening, I'm sure, knows this, but honey, bees aren't using it to grow. They are using it for fuel. It is pure energy. It's the gasoline of a honeybee colony. And bees do get some nutritional benefit from honey. There are probably some secondary plant metabolites and things like that that are important for their health. But from an energy perspective, they just need sugar. And carrying them through winter, they convert that sugar into heat. It's the energy that powers the hive. And that's why they have to have it. So, feeding sugar syrup, feeding high fructose corn syrup, feeding back old honey, as long as they have about a medium super's worth of energy, right, then they're going to, for the most part, more often than not, have all their energy needs met during winter.
That's exactly right. I agree. I laughed the other day. Someone had said something, gotten on social media about do we do that by weight or by volume? And you smile because you've had this discussion, I'm quite certain, a time or two. And my theory on that, first of all, it's just minuscule difference. But if a bee will forage on a Coke can at a gas station and a trash can and manage to get that something out of that, I doubt that the probably micrograms. I don't know.
Yeah.
Difference between weight and volume is negligible.
I tell you, I just don't think about it hard. I remember when I was taught when I was taught to keep bees, the guy told me 1-to-1, so I'd fill half a 5-gallon bucket up with sugar, and then I'd put water in there until it was all dissolved to the top of the bucket. When I
Right.
want 2-to-1, I fill up 2/3 of the bucket with sugar and the other third with water. And so I don't, and I say 2/3, 1/2. I mean, that's just me eyeballing it. I'm not really
No,
measuring
you're
it
not
out. I'm not
measuring it.
weighing it out. No, it's the bees have never seemed to be upset at me. So
No, I hear
but
you. And that's the way we do it too. It's really eyeball at this point. We were so careful when we were new beekeepers, and now it's just like, I
yeah,
only bring that up because I see it brought up quite often, and it just isn't that critical. It just isn't, folks.
they just need the sugar. They just need the sugar. So
They
yeah.
just need the sugar. That's exactly right. What about when it gets cold? So you're saying store, and I completely agree. A medium super is ideal. But if you run into an issue once it starts to get cold, bees don't love. They're not apt to go to cold syrup. It's just not something they do. What do you recommend if we find ourselves in a pickle where it's, let's say December, even 1st of January, and they've consumed all of their stores? How do we get that energy back in there?
Yeah, it's difficult. So let me kind of start from the beginning. First of all, people are viewing this potentially from all around the world. So I'm going to be making some comments that it's hard to generalize, but and it's also difficult for me because I'm in Florida, which is usually so much warmer than so many other places around the US. But for us in Florida, I know that we can start getting some iffy weather in mid-November, and we can have iffy weather all the way, say, through February. If I were in other parts in the northern United States, it might be October to March, or if even north of that, it might be late September to April. So I'm kind of shrinking it or expanding it based on where you are listening to this dialogue. So for us, it is very important to have in those hives what we think those bees need by mid-November, right? Because it's so much easier to prevent it than to fix it. Because just like what you say, let's say for the sake of argument, we come back from holidays in early January and we go out to the apiary and we're hoisting colonies to determine their weight. We can talk about that if you want to.
Sure.
And we determine that colonies 1, 2, and 3 need food. Well, if we're below 0, there's really no way we can put food on colonies that's going to get them that food. When I say 0, that's 0 Celsius, so 32 Fahrenheit. So if it's below freezing, then we can't feed them and expect them to take that food. And so what I always tell people, it's much better to have it there than to put it there. But if it is winter, you can play the warm day game. Like if it's a warm on a given day, you can go and put feed on those colonies for those warm days. There's usually at least a 60-degree day or plus every week or two, depending on where you live. And when we try to administer food in winter, if we have to administer food in winter, we put it right over the head of the bees. Because if you feed them at the entrance, if you feed them in division board feeders inside the hive that are off to the side, it's much harder to get bees to go those directions. So we try to put that food right on top of their head. And I know in northern climates where it can get really cold, they don't even put liquid feed in the colonies. They use these things called fondant patties, which are basically sugar cakes that they will put right above the brood nest or right above whatever their store honey is, so that throughout the winter, the beekeeper doesn't have to visit the hive to provide the sugar. It's just always there in dry form. So the bees can kind of break that cluster on a warm day and have it available, and the beekeeper doesn't have to run out there. But if we really need to emergency feed a colony, we might actually give it frames of honey from other nearby colonies that can spare it, or frames of honey that we've got in the freezer, or we feed them in a way that gets it right over the top of their head. To give you an example of one way that we've done that is if we get a warm day break, and years ago when I was at the University of Georgia as a postdoc, we would actually fill gallon Ziploc bags with sugar syrup, and we would break the hive open and put that Ziploc bag of sugar syrup right on top of the brood nest. And then when it's settled, you kind of do 2 or 3 quick slits on the top of the bag while it's laying on its side, so the side up. And then the bees quickly go and use that. They will drain that pretty quick. But using Ziploc bags to deliver sugar syrup in the winter is a bit of an art, because if you screw it up, you've just doused your bees with lots of sugar syrup in the cold weather. So to me, it's so much easier to prevent this issue than to fix it when it's in the middle of winter. And so those are kind of the ways that we think about doing it, or try to do it ourselves if those situations ever present themselves.
Well, I totally agree. And they just having it there to start with, and too much there's nothing wrong with too much. You know, I'm a firm believer in keeping some back stock of it. We live our lives with back stock. We hoard away groceries. We hoard away bee food when it's on sale, right? We go to the store, sugar's on sale. We put a bunch back. We really need to have that mindset when it comes to stored sugar syrup or stored honey for our bees. Just have it back stock. Put some frames or even an additional, deep honey box put back. That way you could feed it in if you need to, and keeping it close to the brood nest during that cold time. We had I think y'all did too, we called it Snowmageddon in 2021, February, about Valentine's Day. And so many bees died in this area because new beekeepers don't really think through that initial, I got to do this at this last minute, and that is get food really close to that cluster. And that's why you kept talking about keeping it right above their heads, because they'll do this, but they're not going to travel frame over frame over frame to go get it if it's 0 degrees Celsius outside. They're just not going to.
It's a weird situation. You can get colonies starved to death when there's food all around them, and that's what happens.
Exactly.
You got food all around them, and then it gets real cold. It usually happens when it's a snap freeze, and that cluster constricts tightly, and that pull in of the cluster pulls it away from that food that might be just a few inches from their heads, and is so cold they can't break cluster. That's why I really like food all around them. And this is an overgeneralization, but the beauty of generalizations is that they're generally true, right? So generally speaking, clusters will move up slowly in winter. I call it chasing food, and that's why I like the volume of food to be above their heads. As they move up, it's there available. They will kind of move side to side if necessary, but generally speaking, clusters move up, and so I like to have that food resource just over the top of them as they're heading in that direction, which is also why if we need to feed them, I like to put it over the top of them.
And exactly, and they're also moving to follow the heat. The warmth rises, right? So you touched on how to test for what the weight of a hive is. Go ahead and go there.
I just refer to it as hoisting a hive. I mean, it's basically the boxes that compose our hives have handles in them. There's little notches that are cut out. So what I will do is, in our case, late November, December, January, just every few weeks, I'll go to our apiary or our workers at the University of Florida go to the apiary, and they'll get behind the hive, put their hand in the handle that's on the lowest box, the brood box, and they just try to rock the hive forward, kind of hoist it off its back a little bit to kind of rock it forward, and they will use that to judge the weight of the nest. And if it's really easy to rock forward, it probably needs some food. If it's very difficult to rock forward, or you have to use 2 hands, or you're having to strain, they probably have enough food to get them to the next time that you hoist the hive. And so we do that routinely. I've done it forever. And it's an indirect way of judging the overall weight of the hive, which gives you a little bit of feedback on how much honey might be in that nest.
And that's real important to do. We call it tilt test. Whatever you call it, it's the same thing. It's just testing the weight of what's in there. And we even, say start doing it now. That way you've got a feel for what it's supposed to be like. And it's funny how our shoulders will remember that. We know that weight. If done often enough, and when you start feeling it get too light, or if you accidentally bump a box and it slide off its platform, that's a big indicator. And that's happened in years past. And that's when you have to revert back, like what we were talking about, getting them some nutrition one way or another. Good stuff. So moving on to space. and I'm sure I didn't coin this phrase, bee to box ratio.
Mm.
This time of year, it's very difficult, especially for a new beekeeper, to want to pull boxes off because it's almost like a competition of how tall can I get my tower, right? I've got 3 boxes. It's like we've achieved something, or even 2, really and truly, it's more it's what's best for the bees. What is your take on how you would do you do combining or do you do reducing? What is your go there for us?
Sure. Be happy to chat about this. And I'm going to throw out this huge disclaimer. So I use the term hive configuration. So when talking about hive configuration, every beekeeper is different. There's no right or wrong answer. So I'm going to answer your question using my standard hive configuration, but throwing in the caveat that other people can do what they want to and might choose differently. So to answer your question, my standard hive configuration is a single deep brood box with a metal bound queen excluder, and a medium super. So when my colonies grow or shrink, they never shrink below the single deep with the single medium. That's my standard configuration. Some folks run double deeps as their standard configuration. This is fine. It'll work as well. Some people run 3 mediums as their standard configuration. That is also fine. But I'm going to answer your question using my standard configuration of what I'm kind of targeting. So what I want to overwinter with is a deep and a medium, and that medium to be full of honey. So this time of year, if there are any surplus supers on that, so supers above my basic medium, we will remove those medium supers to get down to our standard configuration. And what I'm looking for, again, this time of year, late September, heading into October, is I'm looking for 8 to 10 frames of bees in my deep box, maybe 6 to 8 frames of brood, because here in Florida we're still producing a lot of brood. It slows down at a slower rate than it does in the rest of the country. And then in the medium super, I'm looking for 8 to 10 frames of bees and that medium super to be full of honey. And that's my target. So I don't like to have extra boxes on my hives during winter. And if for some reason I've only got about a deep's worth of bees, I might even take off that standard medium super just to make sure the bee to comb ratio is very high. But I'm trying to manage them throughout summer to ensure that when I finally get to my standard overwintering configuration, that single deep and that single medium, that I've got enough bees to occupy it and there's enough honey in there. So that's kind of my target and what I'm trying to do. If there's a second or a third medium super on it that you're trying to carry through winter, that's a lot of space. A lot of things can go wrong. You can get a lot of, as the bees pull back from those upper supers, you get this unprotected food, that small hive beetles, you get this unprotected comb that wax moths can destroy. So to me, I don't like to leave any more space on than that standard configuration as I'm trying to head through winter. And really, I'm usually back at that standard configuration, usually by mid to late summer. I've kind of managed to get them to that point so that by the time late September rolls around, I'm looking holistically at that colony in that hive and going, okay, do they have enough food? Do they have enough bees to occupy that nest? Does everybody look healthy? Yep, they do. Then I just push them through winter. If they don't, I'm either feeding them to grow them just a little bit to occupy that uppermost box, or feeding them to get them to fill that uppermost box, or I'm removing combs to get them at that ratio to where they can protect the combs that they have in the nest. And I will tell you, Sherry, and it works here in Florida, if my colony is weak, I will often move them to a 5-frame nuke, which we can overwinter really easily here in Florida. And the reason I like 5-frame nukes is that you can also buy 5-frame nuke medium supers. And so I will routinely overwinter small colonies in a standard configuration for a nuke, which is a single deep nuke box and a single deep medium. So I'm still kind of that single deep, single medium configuration. It's just 5-frame nukes rather than 10-frame full hives. And so that's what will happen if my colonies ever shrink below the ability to occupy that 10-frame box, those 10-frame boxes.
So you're saying that you're doing a double story of even a nuke box then?
Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah, we do that. I like 5 frame nukes for that reason. But again, I recognize that I'm in Florida and it's easier to get small
Sure.
colonies through winter than a lot of other places.
Well, and I'm with you. I'm in Southeast Texas, so
Yeah,
we're
exactly.
kind of on the equal plane there.
Mhm.
It's becoming pretty popular too over winter with nukes because so much of the nation, I mean, with the exception of some very northern places, it's staying warm for extended periods of time, and you can get by with that. And we just move nukes closer to other nukes. We bank them closer together to let them be able to work that heating factor, because it's just like us standing close together. In the winter, we're going to be warmer than if we were spread apart.
Sure.
So, but that's interesting. We have, I'm sure probably know Mike Palmer out of Vermont and his double nuke system. We've done that multiple years, or I say I don't have a mouse in my pocket. My husband James does it, but it's very time consuming here in our area to do the double nukes, but he loves playing with that. For me, I just see the nuke as a single entity, and then just keeping them in the warmth zone for overwinter and making sure that they are full of honey, keeping the resources they can at least right there, keeping a backstop where I'm putting it in there if they need it. But you're doing a double. That's interesting to me. It makes me want to try that.
Yeah, but like I said, it's still kind of the standard, what I would call hive configuration, where it's a deep brood box and a medium super. It's just that these are 5 frame deep boxes and 5 frame medium supers. And again, it works for me. I will tell you, I'll give you a quick warning. I've never taken a business class or marketing class in my entire life, but so it's going to sound like I know what I'm talking about. I'm just throwing this out there. I know a lot of commercial beekeepers who produce nukes in summer, overwinter those nukes so that they can be the first ones to the market. They have nukes when no one else does, so they could sell nukes in fall. So, if you live in a warmer climate, you could always overwinter nukes just for the purpose of having some for sale in spring. So it's a little clever way to be first to the market when the demand is high, but the supply is low. But again, don't take business advice from me.
Well,
I've never been formally trained in it. I'm just throwing that out there.
I think that the commercial beekeepers, of which we have not been, and I don't want to be, I respect them. I would rather be on the education end of it. How about you?
What they do is hard work. It's hard work.
I have a very brief story of our time at bee camp. That is how I referred to it. We went and helped a commercial beekeeper for about a week. And I say, if you get the opportunity, do it. It cured me. It's a lot of work. I mean, we've worked hundreds of our own hives, but gosh, that's a lot of work.
Those guys and gals are really superheroes, honestly, what they do.
Superheroes for sure. All right, let's talk about your favorite topic. I bet you know what I'm gonna bring up. That's Varroa.
Yeah, Varroa are a very popular topic. I really wish that they would just go away. I'm tired of having to live with them, but we just kind of have to live with them. That's just the way it is.
It is, and I'm amazed daily of what I read in the thought processes of all aspects, all beginner, intermediate to experienced beekeepers, and their thoughts on what to do and what the proper threshold is. And do I use chemical? Do I use synthetics? Do I use organics? Is this really organic? I don't know. Is that organic? Can I feel safe telling my customers that they've got organic honey if I'm fit? If I did, gosh, where do you land on all that?
Whew, that's a big question. All right. Well, I'll just start this way. This is what I tell a lot of people. There are labeled products for control of Varroa, and they kind of range the spectrum from, essential oil-based products like thymol. There's some organic acids, formic acid, oxalic acid. There are synthetic chemicals, fluvalinate, amitraz, things like that. So there, a lot of folks are worried about putting chemicals in their bee colonies. A lot of folks don't like Varroa and will do whatever it takes to kill them. My official standpoint is nothing that is labeled to put into colonies is as bad for bees as Varroa is. So we need to kill Varroa at all costs.
Yeah.
Now, I don't recommend illegal costs. We don't need to be concocting our own home remedies, mixing our own things and putting in there.
Yeah.
But we do need to kill Varroa. I don't lose any sleep using a synthetic chemical that is labeled to kill Varroa, because I know a failure to kill Varroa efficiently and effectively and efficaciously means that my bees are going to die.
Yeah.
So I will do whatever is legal and scientifically backed to kill Varroa. That's my official standpoint. So I will do whatever is legal to kill Varroa. And so my team and I at the University of Florida, we try to rotate through compounds so that the Varroa in our colonies aren't getting exposed to only one active ingredient throughout the season. So just to give you an example, through our late fall and winter months, they might get heavy doses of oxalic acid based on the manufacturer's recommendations or the labels on the product. If we're somewhere in the neighborhood, say from late May through, my gosh, I don't know, October, we might have to rely heavily on amitraz-based products, so like Apivar as an example, because our Varroa populations are so high during those times of year. We really need the most efficacious, product that we have available to us. So we will do what it takes. And it's funny here, Sherry, that we need Varroa to study Varroa. So we actually have colonies that we manage purposely to have as many Varroa as we can. And so we've got a lot of weird stuff going on here, but we when we are trying to control Varroa, we tend to filter through different active ingredients throughout the season to make sure that we're doing integrated pest management and staying on top of our Varroa in a sustainable manner.
Well, and rotating out the product it's just good business, because we don't want to be part of the problem. We want them to be able to benefit the most they can out of that product. And if we overuse it, then they're not going to. We're going to end up with an efficacy, pardon me, issue. I am on your page. If it works, then use it. I am not okay with watching my bees suffer. And I have seen that in some colonies before, and it's heartbreaking. And then there's times that bees will just leave you. They'll abscond because the conditions are not livable. It's die if we stay, die if we go, basically, because, they might as well try to save themselves. So I always say, we believe that we put the beekeeper hat on. We have an obligation, and we put them in the white box. We need to take care of them the best way that we can. We probably alternate back and forth between organic treatments and synthetic treatments, but most always start the year off with Apivar. It just tends to work very well. And then as we just maintain those good mite counts, then to keep it that way, we'll go, bless you, we'll go into the more organic means. But that's good. I'm glad that you feel that way. And I've heard your talks about that many times, and on your page. The last topic I want to talk about, and I hope it's okay, is the Asian hornet.
Be happy to. Yep.
Yeah, first of all, I'm intrigued by it. I watched a YouTube video podcast type thing that Richard Noel out of France did with Cayman Reynolds. It was so interesting because he's got such history with it. He knows what he speaketh. And a good friend of yours, Keith Delaplane, is who helped confirm that Georgia sighting. So I'd love to hear your take on it, what you've been hearing that we might not as the public be hearing about it and its infiltration in our
Yes, be happy to chat about this. And so it's a bit of a story. So I get to Europe, especially before we had the COVID pandemic. I get to Europe maybe at least every year, maybe twice a year for different meetings. And so up until the COVID pandemic, I was there with some frequency. The reason I bring Europe up as an example is this hornet, Vespa velutina, had been found in Europe, I don't know, over a decade ago. I forget the specific date. And I would always get invited to speak about small hive beetles or beekeeping in the United States or some beekeeping topic or a research topic. But while I was there, they would also bring in speakers to speak about Vespa velutina. At the time was called the Asian hornet. And it's the thing that they were scared of. And the French beekeepers were worried about it, the Spanish beekeepers, the Portuguese beekeepers. It's been found in the UK a few times, and they would have talks about it. So I would listen to all these talks over a decade, going, oh my gosh, I hope we never get that. I hope we never get that. I hope we never get that. I've seen the documentaries on this thing. I'm like, man, I don't want to ever get that. So a few years ago, when Vespa mandarina, same genus, different species, showed up in British Columbia and Washington State in the US, I was like, oh my gosh, this is not good. That's the hornet that at the time was called the Asian giant hornet. Now it's called the giant northern hornet.
Yeah.
It's the biggest hornet species in the world, but it was over there. It's in the opposite corner of the country, you know, and it looks like they may have even eradicated that, I believe, at least in the US. I don't think they found a nest this year, but I could be wrong about that. But in the southeastern US, we didn't really have that big of a threat. Vespa mandarina wasn't here. We didn't have Vespa valentina, what you're actually asking me about, that I'd been seeing about over a decade in Europe. And then, of course, here we are in late September 2023. About a month and a half ago, Vespa velutina was found in Georgia. So this is the hornet that goes by. It originally went by Asian hornet, which is not to be confused with the Asian giant hornet. The Asian giant hornet, as I said already earlier, is now the northern giant hornet, and Vespa valentina is now the yellow legged hornet. And in Georgia, it was found showing up at a beekeeper's colony. The beekeeper didn't know what it was, so he reported it. It turned out to be velutina, the yellow legged hornet. They found a nest, they destroyed the nest, and these hornets started showing up still at other beekeepers' colonies, which led them to believe there's probably a second nest. They issued a press release last week that they had found and destroyed a second nest. And I think they're still getting some hornet activity at bee colonies outside of this second nest. So maybe there's a third nest, maybe there's a fourth nest, who knows? But nevertheless, when I heard this news 5 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, whenever it was, I immediately forwarded this to our extension coordinator, Amy Vu, my colleagues at the Florida Department of Ag and Consumer Services, Brandon Stanford. And I told him, I was like, listen, guys, this is a big deal. This is potentially a big deal. Worst case scenario, we overhype it, it's eradicated, or we overhype it and these things do nothing. And there's the worst we were guilty of is saying that this could be a problem and it turned out not to be a problem.
Right.
The worst case scenario is that we underhype it and this thing turns out to be what the French beekeepers and the Portuguese beekeepers and beekeepers even in Asia where this thing originated are concerned about, which is a terrible colony nuisance.
Yeah.
So that's my introductory speech to it. I'm going to let you answer some other questions, ask some other questions, and I'll answer questions about its biology.
Well, I will about it. I'm fascinated by bee biology, and this, of course, has its own biology. And the fact that it basically starts from a queen. The queen is the caveat. And it's not an overwintered colony like what we are so used to as beekeepers. That in itself sounds to me like that it would be easier to eradicate it during those winter months when we're just dealing with a very small segment other than the expounded version that it gets in spring. Is that a true assessment, or is that just me hoping for against nothing there?
Well, let me answer your question by talking about the biology of this hornet, so that when I get all the way to winter, you'll kind of understand why it's going to be difficult to address. Okay, so we'll do coming out of winter. These hornets, like, gosh, maybe most social wasp species that we would know of, yellow jackets, bald-faced hornets, even paper wasps, their queens overwinter by themselves in the ground, in rotten wood, etc. So a single queen will emerge in late winter, early spring, start a nest, so she can do everything a worker can do. So she can make the paper nest, she can make the paper cells, she can lay eggs in those cells, and then she can go harvest the food necessary to feed that developing young. And once the first round of young emerges from those cells, the queen stays in the nest and just becomes the sole egg layer, while those new workers start building an expanded nest, building expanded cells, going out and foraging for their young, etc. This particular hornet makes a first nest, a primary nest. It's about the size of a tennis ball or softball. And once it reaches a critical mass, they move from that nest to a secondary nest, which grows to be much larger. It can have thousands of workers in it. It can be 2, 3, 4 times the size of a basketball. Now, you got to understand a little bit about hornet biology to understand why it's bad for bees. Hornet, and for that matter, wasp adults, social wasps, the paper wasp, the yellow jackets, things like that, their adults feed on nectar for energy the same way bees need nectar for energy. But the adults hunt for meat. The adults hunt for meat to feed to their young. So their young are carnivores. So the adult wasps are out in the environment stinging soft-bodied insects, caterpillars, grasshoppers, things like that, chewing up those insects and bringing back that chewed meat to feed to their developing larvae. So they need a lot of meat to feed to their larvae. And in spring and summer, soft-bodied insects are available everywhere. But as we leave summer and start to head into fall, the general insect population goes down. So the hornets run out of those types of food and start turning their attention to where there's still lots of insects, i.e. the honeybee colony.
Right.
So in late summer, they can forage on honeybee colonies throughout the year, but the activity at honeybee colonies seems to pick up in late summer, early fall. And incidentally, this is exactly what happens with yellow jackets and even bald-faced hornets.
Right.
So they do the same thing. But in this particular hornet's case, what they'll do is they will fly to a honeybee colony and not land on the nest entrance. But once they get to the colony, they turn their bodies around and face away from the nest entrance. So as bees are flying back to the nest entrance, the hornets are catching them in midair, cutting off their head, cutting off their abdomen, chewing up their thorax, and taking it back to feed to the young in their nest. We call that behavior in front of the nest entrance hawking behavior. They're hawking and waiting for bees to fly in that they can capture. And so you start seeing a lot of this hawking behavior in late summer, early fall, and it can absolutely decimate a colony. You can get enough hornets showing up in your apiary where they're catching lots of worker bees. And the funny thing is it really paralyzes the colony's behavior. When worker bees detect that this is happening, they will stop foraging. You'll see groups of worker bees on the nest entrance. They should be foraging, they should be flying, but they're just paralyzed, almost like paralyzed with fear. Yeah. And so then, as we go into late summer, early fall, you've got these massively large hornet nests. Their populations are as large as they're going to be throughout the year. This huge demand for meat. They're getting it from honeybee colonies. And then the hornets start investing in reproductives. In other words, they start producing male and future queen hornets. So these queens and these males from this nest and all the other nests will go out and mate. And the nest itself will start to dwindle in fall because those hornets don't overwinter.
Right.
And the nest will die, but the reproductives, these mated females, will not.
Right.
They go out into the countryside and nest in rotten wood or in the ground or whatever to come out next spring and start the process all over again. So a single nest can produce dozens, maybe more. I think I've even heard up to 200, which is ridiculously scary.
Yes.
But, dozens of reproductive females that next year are available to create their own nest and go through the season. So the fact that in Georgia, they've already, this is pure speculation. I want to stress this. We don't know. But the fact that they've already destroyed a second nest means that probably there was a nest last year that went undetected that might have produced, reproductive females that overwintered last winter that are the ones who found it and are managing these nests now. And so the reason these things are so bad is they can kill entire honeybee colonies. They can kill entire apiaries. They paralyze the colonies from foraging. But again, these are the worst case scenarios. When you look at the reports from Europe and France and Portugal, et cetera, they've done this to colonies in those areas. And these things are from Asia, which is why their first common name was the Asian hornet bee. Now the Asian hornet, now the yellow legged hornet. The reason I point that out is the Asian honeybees, the Asian species of honeybees, have natural defenses that they can use against these hornets. One of the things that they will do is that they will gather around this hornet and cluster around it. And the hornet has a temperature that will kill it. It's 1 to 2 degrees, 3 degrees or so lower than what temperature kills the bees. So they will cluster around this hornet, heat the hornet, and kill the hornet, and then stop that cluster right before the bees themselves start dying. And there was a recent paper as well that showed that honeybees would collect animal feces and put these feces on the hives, potentially to mask the pheromones of the colonies to make it more difficult for the hornets to find the nest. So the point is there's natural defenses in the native Asian species of honeybees that our honeybees lack, which makes them more vulnerable. Now, worst case scenario, these things are a terrible problem and they spread around the US and it's awful for all of us and changes how we have to keep bees. Best case scenario, none of that happens. They eradicate the nest, life is good. But the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. If the nest all fail, if the folks fail to eradicate all the nests, this thing could establish, it could spread, and it could just be something beekeepers have to worry about, along the lines of small hive beetles. It's really difficult at this point to know how bad it could be. But I think France, Spain, Portugal, they provide good models for us on the spread of this hornet and the damage that it's capable of doing.
And I almost feel somewhat comforted by that, because having pioneers in front of us helps us be able to. They even give away traps in France, in Europe, for beekeepers. I can't help but think that if we're seeing one, there's probably more unseen. Yeah. It's like Varroa, right? If you can see one, there's a lot you can't see. I think the biggest gift that we can give as educators in beekeeping is to just do what you just did. Explain its process, explain its biology, life cycle, and that way, and throw out pictures. It has a very distinct look. The yellow legs are very distinct. Our hornets our everyday hornets don't look like that. And just educating beekeepers, and that way they can be on top of getting rid of it, reporting it, and getting rid of it. And I believe we can do it. I mean, gosh, we're years now into Varroa and we're still not making we're making headway, but it's not near what I'm sure you in the science world would love to see. Well, I've so much enjoyed this, Jamie. I really appreciate you sitting with me, and always interesting to hear your take on things, and you're captivating, and that's why you're so popular. People love to listen when Jamie.
Well, happy to help.
Good. Well, I'm going to let you get off now because I know you got other things to do. Again, thank you, and we'll see you at the next big event. I'm
sure we will cross paths in the future again soon, Sherry. You take care, and happy to help. And if beekeepers ever need anything from me and my team, we're pretty easy to find. Just Google University of Florida Honeybee. You can find us, or even on our social media accounts at UF Honeybee Lab. So we'll help.